Hello. I'm going to talk about chapter 24, finishing up before the midterm. We are still in Italy um, in the Counter Reformation. Remember, the Reformation starts with Luther and Calvin and all their complaints against the church. They don't want to follow the Pope, they think he has too much power. They think that Catholics should study the Bible instead of the Word of God rather than these images. So they're very much opposed to images inside of churches. So we're going to look at some more of their art in the future, but we're going to look at mostly the counter Reformation art of the Catholics. The Catholics are trying to keep people in the church. They're trying to, bring people back to the church and not to become Protestants. So they ironically kind of amp up the art making, and we call this style Baroque. Baroque comes from the word barocco, which is a kind of pearl that is misshapen. It's an elongated oval pearl, and it's just a cute little brooch that I found. Um, so this is what it's called because we will see things that have an oval shape to it, but things are sort of more dynamic than you think of the Renaissance, a circle, a square like the Pazzi Chapel, or the triangle like the Mona Lisa, or any of Raphael's Madonnas. Those are very stable geometric shapes, whereas this Barocco is this sort of undulating, moving shape here. So this is what's to come in art. The sculptor that we start with is Bernini. He was an architect and a sculptor. He made very few paintings. Here's a self-portrait of him, his own painting. Um, and he like the others that have come before him in Rome, works for the popes. If you are an artist of great talent, chances are, if you are Catholic, you will find your way to the Vatican to try to get commissions. This is his Apollo and Daphne. You can see we're in the 1600s. The Italian Renaissance is really like, say, around 1500. Mannerism is later, like 1540, and now we're, way into the 1600s. So we're moving along. So in his early 20s, he sculpted a series of things for the cardinal. And this is Daphne, who is a nymph who is being pursued by Apollo. And she's trying to escape him. He's trying to, abduct her. So she flees to the river and calls to her father, the river god, who, saves her by turning her into a tree so he can't get her. Um, so this is her turning into a tree, and we'll look a little closer at the legs. But this sculpture is meant to be looked at on all sides and sort of move around it. The whole thing is moving, so you sort of walk around and twist with it. Say Michelangelo's David, there wasn't a lot to look at in the back. It was all sort of frontal. You're supposed to see him and his pose, his contrapposto nudity with his stare off into space, whereas Bernini has this, dynamic movement, truly, sculpture in the round meant to be seen in the round. You can see, this drapery here is just like sort of looping around the whole figure. And here you can see her, um, already outlined these, her leg becoming a tree. And then we see her hand. This is a close up becoming, sprouting the laurel leaves. So it's very dynamic. It's this moment when he's about to capture her and the moment she's also turning into a tree. And we have this diagonal, this arc kind of, and the diagonal lighting. So we have movement, drama, diagonal, moment. These are the things you want to remember about the Baroque, because even if it's sculpture, architecture, or painting, that is a thing. These are the sort of like the check marks for the Baroque. And he was just, as you can see, incredibly gifted as far as handling this marble. And we're not going to study this, but just to show you another one in the series to convince you of his talents, this is his Hades and Persephone. And you can see this diagonal movement drama. You can see he's actually seen the Laocoon that Michelangelo has seen in Rome. He's in Rome. Um, but just to show you how he can handle this marble, he's making the fingers look like they're indenting skin. Just incredibly talented. And of course, we had to have another David. So this is Bernini's David. We've seen Donatello's after pose in his nude contrapposto. We saw Michelangelo's before, staring off like a good thinking Renaissance man. And now we see Bernini, who is in his diagonal movement. He is, oops, sorry, go this way. He is bringing the slingshot back at the very arc of where he's going to turn and throw the rock. So that's the moment. So we have diagonal, movement, and moment. Bernini, he if you arc him a little bit, he casts a shadow on himself. So we can say this has something to do with lighting as well, and that's going to be another trademark of the Baroque. So again, just like the Daphne and Apollo, this is meant to be seen in the round, fully in the round. You walk around it, and it's dynamic on all sides. It shows you the motion, and you can see this sort of calm, rational, almost triangle here of the Renaissance. Things are very much, more exciting. Things are moving. This is the Counter Reformation. Bernini is reflecting this energy that the church is trying to infuse back into the church and attract people. This is his Cornaro Chapel, the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. This is the moment when the angel has his arrow and he is going to strike Teresa with the light of God. And she eases back, um, you know, to whoops, let me go back. Sorry. She eases back in her ecstasy. So that's the diagonal and the moment. But what Bernini has also done is he's created this whole stage, and it is like a stage where we are watching this thing play out. And I'll just mention this is a the ecstasy is when she's getting the light of God. And this is a moment where she's converted, right? So this is what the Catholic Church is. We're going to see lots of these callings and conversions. This is a counter Reformation thing. They want people to come back. They're calling people back to the church. They want them to convert back to Catholicism. So that's why we're seeing all these scenes now. So we have this whole stage set here. And what Bernini does is behind the main players, he has bronze rods that he has gold plating on, and he puts them in their own space. And they have this oculus here with light coming through so that if people were coming into the chapel, they would not see them. It's hidden. So it would look like light shining down on these two figures, St. Teresa and the angel. So the whole thing is a stage, and on the sides, you can see the gold a lot better here. On the sides, he has balconies carved in with the donors, cardinals, people of value or worth, sorry, importance in Rome. So there they are on the left and the right. So the whole thing is just one big play. A play is drama, and let's just go back. So we have drama, whole thing super dramatic, moment, diagonals. All these rods are diagonals. The angel is diagonal, and light. So those are all the check marks. We're not going to really cover this. It's not on our review list for the midterm, but Bernini did this giant outdoor sculpture with the four rivers, and I just like this one because it's supposed to be the Nile, and he's hiding his head because his origin is not known. During the Renaissance, they did not know where the Nile started, so Bernini's covering him because he's unknown. Bernini was an architect as well as a sculptor, and he was asked to create the entranceway for the new courtyard for the St. Peter's, the new St. Peter's. So this had all been a dirt lot, which was well, didn't have all these lines and buses on them, but it was, the concrete was put down, and Bernini created this sort of key shape with arms. And I'll show you an aerial. This is the building that was put there. You can see it's new St. Peter's. There's Michelangelo's dome. And you can see there's these two arches. There's extra spaces that aren't part of the building here. We can see it better here. So you can see that, um, you know, the straight shot to St. Peter's has been elongated out here. So what Bernini does is, if you can see this, he um, he makes more of a direct line. He connects it back so that when you're out in the courtyard, the whole thing is framed nicely without this extra space here. And then he meant to create these as if they are arms. So these are all colonnades. Let's go back. You can see. So we're not going to forget all the things that came back in the Renaissance. Obviously, this is very, Greek and Roman looking with all of the columns. But he actually, in his drawings, made it look as if there are welcoming arms coming out of the church, St. Peter's. The obelisk was already there, and he had to design sort of around it. So, and then here we see this oval shape rather than a circle or a square or triangle, the shapes of the Renaissance. Things have changed. An oval is much more dynamic in shape, as is a diagonal. And this is a drawing somebody did. The other advantage of this viewpoint is this is the balcony where the Pope would address everybody. Even now, if you go to the Vatican and stand there, that's where he comes out and does his thing. This is the Baldaccio. A Baldaccio is a silk canopy, and this is just a giant altar. We saw the pulpit of Pisano in the other chapter. This is similar to that, but about 10 times higher than this is, about 100 feet high. So this is the new St. Peter's, and it has this baldacchino on around the altar. You can see the altar right here. So this would be sort of like framing everything in the apse here. And here it is. He's made like a canopy out of bronze. But we're going to notice these columns that are sort of undulating and spiraling. Even, the static column is now moving, right? We have this drama and movement in the Baroque. Bernini is so gifted that King Louis XIV asked if he could borrow him, and if the Pope tells you to do something, you do it. So Bernini goes up to France, where he didn't really get along with Louis XIV too much, um, and he made this portrait bust of him, and you can see that he has his head turned. There's movement. The drapery here is all moving. It's at a diagonal. So it's limited. The French have their own sensibilities. They're still very much Rococo up there, which we'll look at the end of this chapter. They have their own very lighthearted way of doing Baroque. But while he was there, he makes some sketches for the competition of the Louvre, which was a palace at one point. Now, of course, it's the famous museum that holds the Mona Lisa, along many thousands of other pieces of art. Um, so the King Louis, I guess you go back. King Louis didn't like this design. You can see it's arced here. He didn't really get this Italian thing of this movement in architecture. And so Bernini thinks he's going to use a circular building to be more stable. It's more like a Greek temple that way. Like Tempietto in the Renaissance, based on the Tholos in Greece. And King Louis says, no, I don't like that. And this is what he goes with. This is not, of course, Bernini. He goes with a very classical, static, Renaissance looking building, which is the Louvre. Borromini is the only other architect we're going to look at, he is sort of like the Baroque architect. He found a way to include this movement in the facade of a building and the interior, I should say. So he has this is sort of what Borromini was drawing himself for the Louvre. So we have this building that curves. We have the Greek columns, but we have this curving building with all this movement. We have this oval medallion here. So the building is just undulating on the street. And the inside also has all kinds of nooks and crannies and moves everywhere in and out. It's very dynamic. And instead of a circular dome, Baromini comes up with an oval dome. So this is the floor plan here. And you can see it's still symmetrical. It's just not axial symmetrical like a square. It's only symmetrical if you divide it one way or the other, not both ways. And I just find this dome so beautiful. I mean, it's just wonderful. Good job, Baramini. We're not going to really study this one, but this is the other building in a chapter. You can see everything sort of coming and going, very Baroque, and then the top of it's like a wedding cake, like this spirally motion. And then here's his floor plan. This is a whole different type of dome. It's like a quatrefoil, so incredibly dynamic. Gonna skip the Caracci's. All right, Caravaggio. Um, by far my favorite artist. Caravaggio was very talented as a young man. This is a still life with basket of fruit. And he was very much what we would call a realist. He liked to make things look very realistic. He didn't avoid, making things like fruit look rotten, and this probably has some symbolism to it. But as a young man, he was recognized as a very good painter. He did not come from a wealthy background. As a matter of fact, he was a little bit on the sketchy side, possibly. He was always in and out of trouble with the law. It's said that he possibly killed a man in a tennis match over money, most likely. He gambled a lot. Um, he just was kind of a thug known around Rome at that time. But he hooks up with, not hooks up, he meets Cardinal Del Monte, and he is asked to come and live in his residence and be the court painter. And he's going to give him a series of paintings. And a lot of these have to do with young male musicians because Del Monte was the head of the Sistine Choir. So he was a famous musician at the time. And this is the first time that Caravaggio drew a steady income. So he goes from sort of this poor artist to you know somebody of renown in a way. His status changes, and so a lot of his early paintings look Caravaggio often used the very same models. So there's several of his paintings that look just like this guy or this guy. And you can see it has a lot of classical things happening here, a lot of Renaissance things, but hopefully you can see also that Caravaggio is changing the amount of value that things are getting, especially down here on the bottom. You can see he starts to really enjoy working with a darker palette. And this idea about drama and movement can be aided with a heightened use of value. So this is Baroque still. It has this diagonal movement and it has dramatic lighting. It doesn't have much of a moment though, but this will change in Caravaggio's body of work. So soon enough, Caravaggio literally turns the lights down to so low that there's just like usually one source of light. Um, and he uses a diagonal, lighting, drama, and moment. He uses all of them all the time. So this is his supper at Emmaus. This is the moment where Christ is telling the people he has met on the road to Damascus that he is Christ who has risen from the dead, and they didn't believe him. So this is that moment, and you can see these diagonals happening here going through Christ. That's not in your book. So these are some terms you should start to know. Chiaroscuro is the dramatic use of lights and darks, value we're talking about. And then tenebrism is like candlelight in a dark room. It's like one little light source to sort of, shed light on a few things to tell a story. The one we cover a lot in your chapter is the Calling of St. Matthew. This is the Contarelli Chapel. And the Contarelli family asked Caravaggio to make three paintings of Matthew, St. Matthew, and he does so in this chapel. So the one we're going to look at is the big painting over here. Notice that this painting is still what we call in situ. In situ means it's in the place it was made for. It hasn't been taken off the wall and brought to a museum. You have to go to this chapel to see these paintings. And a lot of Caravaggios are still in the place that they belong. Some of the ones I just showed you about the muses and the musicians, those travel around, but in general, most Caravaggios stay in Rome. You have to go there to see them because they're in the church on the wall. So this painting here, the Calling of Saint Matthew. Matthew's name used to be Levi, and he is called to service. He's called by Christ to join the church and be an apostle. Um, so this is a calling scene, right? Like the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. It's somebody coming into the church, like coming back, being a Catholic. And Caravaggio is using light to tell the story, right? So here he is. You see this diagonal come in and it's lighting up these figures here, and hopefully we notice this boy's looking out, and then this man is pointing to himself, and then we can follow the diagonal back and see there is a hand here, and then there is a face here, and then we have to put it all together with what little information Caravaggio is giving us. And what he's giving us is Jesus has walked probably in the door, because it seems like the door has just opened and shed light on them. And he is pointing at Matthew, who points to himself. So Jesus is, calling him literally with this hand. And yes, that is the hand from the Sistine ceiling. And Matthew is pointing to himself. Are you calling me Christ? Because he cannot believe it. He's in the tavern, with his tax money here on the table. He's doing his business, right? And if you remember anything about the Renaissance, the taxes and money, people often buy their way out of this kind of sin, this excess. And so he doesn't have to buy himself out of sin. He is being called to the church. So Caravaggio is using this value to tell the story, right? It is the moment when he is being called. It's a diagonal, it's drama, it's lighting, all of these together. And Caravaggio's first name is Michelangelo, but of course, there's only one Michelangelo in Rome, so that's why we call Caravaggio Caravaggio. But he is in Rome. He can see the Sistine ceiling. He can see all the artwork that is there. So he often will quote, visually quote Michelangelo, who he admired. A lot of other artists like Raphael, he did not admire. Another conversion scene in your chapter is the conversion of St. Paul. And here we see St. Paul in his foreshortening. All right. If you remember, like Giotto's little angels, how, they hardly even look foreshortened compared to this Caravaggio diagonal. So Paul was converted in a stable, and he, falls down and has the light of God on him. And he was, called and converted. But Caravaggio obviously is criticized for this because most of the composition is a horse and not the front of a horse, right? So he kind of subverts the main event by putting it on the ground. Um, but it's, to me, it's just a lot more dramatic that way. And this guy on the left hardly even notices what's happening, right? He's attending to the horse. This guy here is a model that Caravaggio uses in many of his paintings. So we have the diagonal, a diagonal, lighting, drama, moments. There's the formula. Same thing here with the entombment. If you can think of Pontormo's Entombment, that makes a good comparison, right? With its bright colors and its odd things. But what it's similar to, it seems like this guy's gonna, same model, going to drop Christ, just like in the Pontormo, right? But we have this diagonal moment drama lighting. And just to show you this, this isn't in your book. This is another David by Caravaggio. All that moment drama lighting, diagonal. But in the head of the giant is a self portrait by Caravaggio, and that is his homage to um, Michelangelo's self portrait, which of course he knows very well, being in Rome. This is the one from your book, The Taking of Christ. That is the scene. It's sometimes called the Kiss of Judas, and we saw Giotto's and Masaccio's Kiss of Christ. But here we have this more non-traditional way. Instead of everybody's lined up and they're taking Christ away, and Judas comes up to him face to face, everybody in this seems to be lunging and pushing, and everything's moving around. It's a very chaotic scene. Um, I feel like it's much more natural, no, if you're coming to arrest somebody and then somebody wants to, get in the middle and have a moment with you, it's going to get crazy in a way. Over here on the right is Caravaggio's self-portrait, and you can see he's getting very close to realism, or almost like a photographic. There's no photographs yet. Likeness with his, rendering of these forms. So we have John the Evangelist over here, just sort of, gesturing and like, kind of freaking out. And Christ is, he just looks so sorrowful there. And Judas, who is still in shadow, like in the Last Supper, is, he's lunging. He's like desperate to have his moment. And the last Caravaggio we'll look at, because we're going to compare this to Gentileschi's, is the Judith beheading Holofernes. Judith is an Old Testament figure who um, goes to seduce and behead the Assyrian king who is on his way to besiege her town. So she is a widow in mourning, and she gets rid of her widow's clothing and puts on her finest and gets him drunk. And she and her handmaiden sneak into his tent, and behead him. And then the end of the story, she takes the head back to her town and holds it up, and everybody knows they are safe. So Holofernes is the Assyrian general, and then Judith is this maiden here, and that's her handmaiden, or the female here, and that's her handmaiden, who in this version is very old, and she holds a sack as if that's where they're going to put the head to carry back to town. But you can see this is the moment she's about to take the head off. Diagonal, very dramatic. All the arms make diagonals as well. And we'll remember that in a second. So Artemisia Gentileschi is a rare female figure in this time period that we look at. She was trained by her father, who was an admirer of Caravaggio. And at this point, many people are actually just outright imitating Caravaggio. Um, it's not a thing to be original at this time. If you can paint just like somebody who's very successful, it's probably a good for your career. She was the first woman to become a member of the Academy of Design in Italy, which is quite a thing. And she's often thought of as the first feminist painter. She often wrote letters to her friends and family members complaining about, and to people who bought her paintings. There's some in your book, complaining about the price that she got compared to men. So, she's out there, good feminist with women's rights, equal pay. Um, she unfortunately had been abused and assaulted as a young girl when she was sent to study with, um, not to go live with, but she studied with a man that her father arranged, and he assaulted her. and eventually they go to trial, and she wins. And a lot of her subjects have to do with this idea of the assault and also, women being strong figures. So this is why she's often considered a feminist artist, even though there was no such thing as a feminist in that time. So this is her version of Judith slaying Holofernes, and I hope you can see this is not a tender, or not tender. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a hesitant Judith, as in Caravaggio's. This is actually a self-portrait of Gentileschi here, and we see all the diagonals like Caravaggio's leading to the head. But in this case, it is not an old maiden; it is a young girl who looks like she's going to jump in and help kill him if Judith can't get it done. So we have like sort of this, sort of sisterhood here against a man. So that's also interpreted as feminism. And you could see hers is so much more violent. You have the blood squirting. I mean, Caravaggio's blood looked like red strings kind of coming out of them. So we have this blood squirting, dripping down the sheets. Um, it's on their hands. And you can hopefully see it's almost hard to tell who's whose paintings are whose. She is so closely, uh, painting in the style of Caravaggio. And that's what she meant to do. So here's another version, even it's a different colored dress, but this is another version of the same painting, almost the same face. Um, this is another version of it. You see the head is already off here, and the handmaiden's going to, put it in the sack here. And Judith, aka Artemisia here, is literally painting by candlelight. She's blocking the candlelight so that she could see outside better. So we have all the, trademarks of the Baroque, the diagonal, the drama, the moment, um, and the style, the tenebrism over here and chiaroscuro over here of Caravaggio. A Spanish still life painter, um, just to show that this Caravaggio style travels everywhere and affects all kinds of art. Um, Juan Sanchez Cotan painted still lifes mostly. That's what he wanted to paint. And he immediately changes his style to be like Caravaggio's with his chiaroscuro. He often just gives them a black background. So everything sort of glows. Um, and the realism of Caravaggio translates to his. He has many, many, many of these just awesome paintings. And a lot of them have like if you're going to put rotten fruit or birds or melons, like everything is symbolic. That's still life artists often try to justify um, still life as like a valuable thing or an intellectual endeavor by creating symbolism in them. And Zubran also painted still life. He painted a lot of things. He painted religious subjects too. We're going to look at one. But I mean, he gets almost photographic like. I mean, it's so realistic with the reflections, right? It's so dramatic with the black background. So this use of light, starting with Caravaggio, really just travels everywhere. I mean, these are both Spanish painters. That's just amazing. Um, and this is his Saint Serapion. Um, and this is just uh, a direct quotation of something Caravaggio would do. It almost looks like similar models to them, where this is a martyr who was, um, this is his death moment. You can see all this drapery and the contrast, right? So we have this chiaroscuro. We have sort of a diagonal here. It's the moment where he's dying. This is a very odd painting though, because it's just so he's like everything is so dark. It's not just the slide. Everything is so dark. You can hardly see like the ropes holding him up. Well, the Spanish Baroque painter we rarely look at is Diego Velázquez, or Velázquez. If you're in Spain, you say it that way. And very early on, he starts to paint exactly like Caravaggio. You can see he even takes these mythological figures, except for him, he uses everyday models. Uh, Velázquez very much liked to paint regular people for a while. And sometimes he would dress them up as muses and then intermingle them with regular people around town, questionable characters in some cases. Um, but eventually he becomes the court painter and he'll paint very fancy people as well. So one of his very early like genre scenes, everyday people doing things every day. This water carrier, a man who sells water in Seville, Spain. But you can see, even though it's and he has this humble man, you can see it's very realistic, and we'll look maybe back at this when we get to realism, because the realist painters will look at Velasquez for inspiration. You can see the diagonal, the chiaroscuro. It's not dramatic though. This doesn't always translate to genre scenes. Not, that's kind of kept to the religious scenes. And he did paint lots of different people. He hung around. He knew a lot of different people, and he was really, really good at portraiture. So much so that he catches the eye of the king, and he becomes the court painter. And what a court painter does is they go and they can live at court if they're one of those, if they're like the court painter, which Velasquez becomes, and you almost live like a royal person and you paint many portraits of the royal family. So this is one he did of Philip IV. This is another one. This man was actually Velasquez's servant, and he paints him. And you can see the diagonal, the lighting, the movement with the pose. It's very Baroque to like twist your shoulders around. Sort of how people pose now for pictures, I think. But this is the most famous one we cover in the chapter, Las Meninas. Las Meninas means the handmaidens. And here we have all of these figures, um, lots of them looking at us. So in the foreground, we probably see this little girl first. She is all lit up in lights. And we see these handmaidens around her. That's the title. This little girl is the Princess Margarita, the daughter of the king and queen. And they are all, except for this girl who's very attentive, looking at us, and except for this little brat who's kicking the dog. And then we have this man here. Well, he has a brush and he has a palette. That is Velasquez himself. In the middle ground, we have a nun and a priest. And then in the background, we have a man in a doorway looking like he's either coming or going up the stairs. So we can't really tell what's going on in this painting until we look around at the very background and say, all right, these are giant paintings. And this could be a painting, but the light seems to be kind of crazy. It can't be a window because it doesn't match up with this guy. Scale wise, they look very small compared to him. And where's the window? He's inside. So it can't be a window. It's probably not a painting. It's probably a mirror because of the lighting, right? And if this is a mirror, then where are they standing? This is the aha moment of this. This is very similar to another painting we've seen. So here's Velasquez, and we'll go back to that one. And there's the mirror. And up close, you can see, because I just showed you two portraits, that's the king himself, and this is the queen. So in the background, this is the king and the queen, which means they're standing, if we were in front of the painting, where we are. And all of these people are not looking towards us, they are looking towards the king and the queen. And Velasquez is peeking out from his canvas. So he's either painting them or they've just come into the room. So we have all these diagonals, dramatic lighting. It's a moment, the moment where everybody's looking at the king and queen. They've probably just arrived. I feel like this guy's a telltale sign of that because he seems very, should I leave? Should I come back? The king and queen are here now. And this girl's curtsying. So most likely they've just come back. Either they've returned to have continued the painting or they've just come in to see their little girl being painted. And just of note, the dwarf, and then the other picture of the dwarf, dwarfs were hired to be at the court to either entertain people or to play with the children because they were adult supervision without, um, you know, that they could play with. It's just a mean society. All right, so this painting, hopefully you can think about the Vermeer. We just saw the illusion with the painting there. That makes a good pairing. And just to talk about Velasquez's style, we're going to see this idea of brushwork kind of loosening up, where at a distance everything seems to blend together and seem realistic. But artists are finding ways to handle the paint without painting every single hair or every single thing. Like you think of the northern people um like Van Eyck, who I just talked about. He with the mirror, right? He used oil paint to a degree where you had to, use a tiny, tiny brush for every single thing. um, Artists are finding ways to sort of use paint in a more painterly way, almost in an abstract way, but you can see from a distance, it looks like a hand. So the more paintings can be made this way as well. And there's the Van Eyck I'm talking about, this illusion of using a mirror in the background. And here are all the players in that painting. All right, so that's it for this chapter. I will post this for you to watch and start reviewing for the midterm. Thank you.